Remembering Hulk Hogan, new details emerge on wrestling legend's shocking death. The wrestling community is in shock as new details emerge about the sudden passing of WWE legend Hulk Hogan. At 71, the immortal icon's death has left millions heartbroken, with tributes flooding social media from fans and fellow superstars alike. 2 weeks ago, the wrestling world lost one of its most iconic warriors, and the silence that followed was deafening. Hulk Hogan. The Immortal One, the man who defined an era, the living embodiment of wrestling's golden age, has taken his final bow at the age of 71. His death wasn't just the loss of a legend, it was the end of a chapter that shaped millions of childhoods, inspired generations of athletes, and built WWE into a cultural powerhouse. Now, new details are emerging about the final days of a man whose name became synonymous with wrestling itself, and the shockwaves are rippling far beyond the squared circle. It began not with a grand WWE announcement or a press conference, but with a quiet whisper. An unconfirmed text message that spread like wildfire among veteran wrestlers and backstage staff. Hogan's gone. At first, it felt impossible. Hulk Hogan, the man who once seemed larger than life, who survived career-ending injuries, public controversies, and even near-fatal illnesses, was suddenly gone. Within minutes, that whisper turned into a roar. WWE's official social media accounts posted the dreaded black-and-white tribute image, his classic pose frozen in time, framed by the years of his life, 1953 to 2025. The wrestling world stopped. And for a moment, even the endless chatter of the internet fell into stunned, reverent silence. The first reports came from close to his family. According to sources, Hogan had been found unresponsive in his Clearwater, Florida mansion, a home he'd often referred to as his sanctuary. In recent years, he had slowed down, making fewer public appearances, but always keeping himself just within arm's reach of the fans who adored him. It's said that in the weeks before his passing, Hogan had been dealing with complications related to his heart, a lingering reminder of the toll decades of physical punishment had taken on his body. Wrestling isn't a kind profession. It's a brutal, unrelenting lifestyle that demands everything from those who dare to enter the ring, and Hulk Hogan gave more than most. Inside the WWE locker rooms around the world, the news hit like a chair shot to the gut. Superstars who had grown up idolizing Hogan found themselves openly weeping. Veteran wrestlers, men and women who'd shared the ring with him, stood frozen, staring at their phones, unsure what to say, unsure how to breathe. Backstage at a WWE live event in Chicago, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Matches went on, but the energy was different. There were no over-the-top celebrations, no exaggerated trash talk. Even the loudest heels spoke softer. The crew moved with a subdued focus, and in the gorilla position, the air felt heavy with grief. For John Cena, a man often called the Hogan of his era, the loss was personal. Hogan had been a mentor, a supporter, and a friend, even when Cena's star began to eclipse the older generation. Cena was reportedly mid-rehearsal for a film project when he got the call. According to a source close to him, he stopped everything, walked to a quiet corner of the set, and stayed there for nearly an hour, staring at the floor. Later, on social media, Cena posted a simple tribute. "Thank you for showing us how to live like a champion. Rest easy, brother." No hashtags, no photos. Just words, raw and unpolished, from a man who understood what it meant to fill Hogan's boots. In Tampa, Titus O'Neil, who had often spoken about Hogan's impact on his own career and his charity work, reportedly broke down in tears during a community event. "We just lost the greatest of all time," he told attendees, his voice cracking. Not just in the ring, but in the way he connected with people. Hulk Hogan made you believe. Those words, captured on a shaky phone video, have since been shared millions of times. They aren't the words of a fellow wrestler. They're the words of a fan who got to live his dream alongside a childhood hero. But perhaps the most heartbreaking reactions came from the men and women of Hogan's generation. Ric Flair, his longtime friend and occasional rival, was said to be inconsolable. In a statement released through his team, Flair wrote, "We wrestled, we fought, we argued, but above all, we loved each other like brothers. I don't know how to live in a world without Hulk Hogan." Friends say that Flair, who has faced his own brushes with mortality, is taking Hogan's passing especially hard. The two had been planning a public appearance together later this year, a Legends reunion tour that now will never happen. For Stone Cold Steve Austin, the shock was less about the inevitability of age and more about the sheer size of Hogan's shadow. "Without Hulk Hogan, there's no Stone Cold Steve Austin," Austin said during a live podcast just hours after the news broke. "He built the damn house we all work in. He's the reason wrestling hit the mainstream. He's the reason kids in the 80s ran around tearing their shirts and saying their prayers. You don't replace a man like that. You just remember him." The new details about Hogan's final hours paint a picture not of a tragic, lonely end, but of a man surrounded by those who loved him. Family sources confirm that he spent his last evening at home with close friends, reminiscing about his glory days, watching old matches on VHS tapes, and even laughing about some of the more outrageous moments in his career. At one point, he reportedly turned to a friend and said, "I've had the ride of my life, brother. No regrets." That same friend told reporters that Hogan seemed at peace, more reflective than usual, but still full of that signature charisma. WWE management has already begun making plans to honor him in a way befitting his impact. A 10-bell salute is expected at the next Monday Night Raw, with the roster assembled on the stage in his memory. There are whispers of dedicating this year's WrestleMania to his legacy, something that has never been done before for a single performer. Sources inside WWE say that Vince McMahon, who was seen in tears after learning the news, is personally overseeing plans for Hogan's tribute. There would be no WrestleMania without Hulk Hogan, McMahon reportedly told staff. He was the cornerstone, the foundation, the man who made millions believe. For the fans, the tributes have been overwhelming. Social media is a flood of yellow and red, as profile pictures change to Hogan's iconic colors. Clips of his greatest matches, his unforgettable promos, and his larger-than-life entrances are being shared by people who weren't even alive during his peak. That's the kind of reach Hogan had. His legacy wasn't confined to one generation. From the kids who saw him slam Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3, to the teens who watched him lead the NWO during the Monday Night Wars, to the casual viewers who only knew him as a pop culture icon, everyone has a Hogan memory. And those memories are as colorful as the man himself. Some remember the larger-than-life hero who told kids to say your prayers and eat your vitamins. Others recall the swaggering, villainous Hollywood Hogan who changed the game in WCW. Many saw him not just as a wrestler, but as a symbol of triumph, the man who always found a way to Hulk up when the odds were against him. That narrative of resilience, of never staying down, wasn't just a gimmick. Those who knew him personally say it was who he truly was. Behind the scenes, wrestlers who had their differences with Hogan over the years are also coming forward with respect. Bret the Hitman Hart, who had a complicated relationship with Hogan during their careers, issued a statement saying, "We didn't always see eye to eye, but I'll never deny what Hulk Hogan did for this business. He made wrestling bigger than anyone thought it could be." Even those words, from one of Hogan's most notable critics, speak volumes about the man's influence. But the mourning isn't confined to WWE's walls. AEW wrestlers, Impact veterans, and JPW legends all have shared their condolences. Chris Jericho, who faced Hogan in WWE and WCW, posted a photo of the two embracing after a match, captioned simply, "We told stories together, brother. Rest easy." Kenny Omega, who never wrestled Hogan but grew up a fan, tweeted, "Every wrestler in the world owes something to Hulk Hogan. Without him, the world would have never looked our way." The full impact of Hogan's death is still settling in, and as the hours pass, more stories emerge. Stories of kindness, of unexpected generosity, of quiet mentorship. One independent wrestler recalled meeting Hogan at a charity event. "I was a nobody," he said, "but he treated me like I was the main event. He gave me advice I still use to this day. That's the Hulk Hogan I'll remember. By late evening, fans had begun gathering outside Hogan's Clearwater mansion. Many brought flowers, some carried old WWF action figures, others simply stood in quiet reflection. One man, holding his young son on his shoulders, told a reporter, "I wanted my boy to know who this man was. Because Hulk Hogan wasn't just a wrestler, he was a hero to millions. Including me." The days ahead will be filled with memorials, interviews, and retrospectives. WWE will run video packages celebrating his career, wrestling podcasts will dissect every era of his life, and old friends will share never-before-heard stories. But for those closest to him, the pain is immediate, sharp, and deeply personal. As one current WWE superstar put it, "We lost more than a legend today. We lost the heart of wrestling." Because Hulk Hogan was more than the moves, more than the promos, more than the championships. He was the man who brought wrestling into living rooms across the world, who made even the smallest kid in the back row believe that good could triumph over evil. He was flawed, human, and complicated, but in the ring, under those bright lights, he was larger than life. And now, in death, his shadow stretches across the entire industry. Tonight, as arenas go quiet and locker rooms fill with stories, the wrestling world is united in grief. From the biggest stars to the newest rookies, from the diehard fans to the casual viewers, everyone is feeling the same thing: gratitude. Gratitude for the memories, for the inspiration, for the larger-than-life figure who reminded us that no matter how hard you're hit, you can always fight back. Hulk Hogan may be gone, but his spirit will forever echo in the roar of the crowd, in the chants of "Hogan, Hogan," and in the hearts of those who still believe in the magic of wrestling. The morning after the announcement of Hulk Hogan's passing, the wrestling world woke to a grief that felt heavier than any championship belt. In Clearwater, Florida, the gates of Hogan's mansion were lined with flowers, candles, and handwritten notes from fans who had made the pilgrimage overnight. Some came dressed in the yellow and red colors that had defined his persona. Others brought old VHS tapes, action figures, and autographed programs from house shows decades past. But no matter the token, each one carried the weight of a final farewell. Inside WWE headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut, a meeting was called before the sun had even risen. Triple H, now the creative head of the company, addressed a room filled with writers, producers, and top executives. His voice cracked as he told them, "We've lost one of the pillars of our industry. Everything we do from here until WrestleMania will carry his spirit." Plans began forming immediately. A special episode of Monday Night Raw entirely dedicated to Hogan, a Hall of Fame re-airing of his induction speech, and a tribute video to air across every WWE platform. Meanwhile, superstars around the globe were sharing their own memories. Roman Reigns posted a rare, heartfelt message on Instagram, along with a photo of a teenage Roman meeting Hogan backstage at a show in Hawaii. That day, Roman wrote, "He told me, brother, if you believe in yourself, you can main event WrestleMania." I believed him. And I did. Seth Rollins, known for his articulate promos, kept it brief but powerful, the first wrestler I ever watched. The reason I'm here today. Rest in power, Hulk. Over in AEW, Tony Khan opened Dynamite with a solemn statement honoring Hogan, acknowledging that his contributions transcended company lines. "Every wrestler in every promotion is standing a little smaller today," Khan said. Because the largest figure in wrestling history has left the ring for the last time. Even in New Japan Pro Wrestling, where Hogan had wrestled during the early part of his career, a tribute graphic appeared before the main event, accompanied by 10 bells of respect. Perhaps the most emotional response came from Randy, Macho Man, Savage's brother, Lanny Poffo, who had maintained a close relationship with Hogan long after his brother's passing. Speaking through tears on a morning radio show, Poffo said, "He was my friend. He was my brother in arms. We fought together, laughed together, and cried together. And now I've lost him too. The world will talk about Hulk Hogan, the icon. I'll just miss Terry, my friend." As the tributes poured in, details began to emerge about Hogan's final week. Sources close to his family revealed that he had been in relatively good spirits despite ongoing heart complications. He had attended a small gathering with old wrestling friends at a local Clearwater restaurant just 3 nights before his death. Patrons who recognized him that night say he took photos with everyone who asked, even signing an old WWF lunchbox for a fan who had carried it for over 30 years. He was glowing that night, one witness said, like a man who knew he'd done everything he wanted to do. In private, Hogan had been working on a memoir. Not about wrestling, but about life after the spotlight. Friends say he was determined to show the world that there was more to Terry Bollea than the 24-inch pythons and the Hulkamania headbands. He wanted to talk about forgiveness, one confidant revealed. About making peace with the people he'd clashed with. He wanted to leave the world with more than just wrestling memories. He wanted to leave lessons. Those lessons weren't lost on the current generation of WWE talent. Becky Lynch, who had never shared a ring with Hogan, still called him a guiding light in her tribute. When I first joined WWE, I was terrified, she wrote. Hulk Hogan pulled me aside one day at an event and said, "You belong here, lass. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That confidence carried me through more matches than I can count. Funeral arrangements, according to Hogan's family, will be private, held at his Clearwater mansion for close friends and relatives. However, WWE is in discussions with the family to host a public memorial event at Madison Square Garden, the arena where Hogan cemented his legacy and became the face of professional wrestling. Fans have already begun petitioning for his statue to be placed alongside Bruno Sammartino's at the MSG entrance. Backstage, older legends like The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, and Kurt Angle are said to be deeply involved in planning the memorial. Undertaker, who famously faced Hogan in 1991 and 2002, reportedly told Vince McMahon, "He made The Undertaker a star. I'll never forget that." Kurt Angle, who shared several matches and segments with Hogan, said in an interview, "He was the first guy to welcome me to WWE with open arms. He didn't have to, but that's who he was. He wanted the next generation to succeed." Outside the wrestling world, the news has resonated just as deeply. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson posted a lengthy tribute calling Hogan the godfather of charisma and crediting him with inspiring his own career both in and out of the ring. Sylvester Stallone, who acted alongside Hogan in Rocky III, said in a statement, "He was a true champion in every sense of the word. He gave 110% in everything he did and made everyone around him feel like a star." But the grief wasn't just for the public figure, it was for the man his close circle knew. Jimmy Hart, Hogan's longtime friend and manager, has been nearly silent since the announcement, save for a single message to TMZ, "I'm heartbroken, baby. I lost my best friend." According to sources, Hart had spoken to Hogan the night before his passing, and the two had spent nearly an hour on the phone reminiscing about their early days on the road. In the coming days, WWE plans to air a 2-hour special titled Forever Immortal, The Life and Legacy of Hulk Hogan. The program will feature archival footage, interviews from fellow wrestlers, and unseen backstage moments that show the man behind the legend. One particularly emotional segment reportedly features Hogan in a candid conversation with Mean Gene Okerlund from years ago. "When it's all over, brother," Hogan says in the clip, "I just want them to remember that I loved this business, and I loved the fans. That's all that matters." Even now, in the hours following his death, Hogan's influence is everywhere. At independent wrestling shows, performers are dedicating matches to his memory. In gyms across America, people are blasting his entrance theme, "Real American," as they train. On social media, the hashtag #ThankYouHogan continues to trend, filled with personal stories from fans whose lives he touched. Whether by meeting him at an autograph signing, watching him battle Andre the Giant, or simply hearing him tell them to believe in yourself. The finality of Hogan's passing has forced even his harshest critics to pause. Wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer, who often criticized Hogan during his career, wrote in a column, "For all the controversies, for all the flaws, there has never been another performer like Hulk Hogan. He wasn't just part of wrestling history, he is wrestling history." And perhaps that's the truth that unites every tribute, every tear, every bowed head. Hulk Hogan was not perfect, no man is, but he was unforgettable. He was the thunderous ovation, the child in the front row wearing a feather boa, the collective gasp as he powered out of a pin at the count of 2. He was the dream made flesh, and for over 4 decades, he carried that dream for millions. In the words of one fan holding a homemade sign outside Hogan's home, "Heroes live forever. Hulkamania never dies." The day of Hulk Hogan's private funeral in Clearwater began with a sky so still it felt intentional, as though even the wind understood it wasn't a day for noise. The mansion he had called home for decades, white-walled, sunlit, adorned with palm trees that swayed over the water, was now a place of hushed footsteps and heavy hearts. Security lined the gates, but there were no flashing lights, no media chaos. This was by design. The family wanted the world to remember Hogan as he had lived, larger than life in public, but fiercely protective of the people he held close in private. Inside the gates, the driveway was lined with floral arrangements sent from around the globe. Red and yellow roses, lilies, and sunflowers, his signature colors, framed the path leading to the front entrance. The largest wreath, positioned at the center of the walkway, bore a ribbon that read simply, "To the Immortal One." Beneath it was a handwritten card signed by Vince McMahon himself. It read, "You built this house. Without you, there would be no us." The gathering inside was small, no more than 50 people. Every face in the room belonged to someone who had been part of Hogan's life, whether in the ring or behind the curtain. Legends like Ric Flair, The Undertaker, and Shawn Michaels stood alongside newer names like John Cena and Roman Reigns. There were no cameras, no fans, no publicists. Only wrestlers, family, and a few lifelong friends who had traveled from every corner of the world to say goodbye. In the main room, where floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Clearwater Bay, Hogan's casket sat open, draped in a yellow and red cloth. Inside, he lay dressed in a custom tuxedo with a red bow tie, his trademark bandana folded neatly in his hands. On the bandana, in gold thread, were the words, "Hulkamania Forever." His face was peaceful, almost smiling, as though caught mid-promo in a dream. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of an air conditioner and the occasional muffled sob. Jimmy Hart stood closest to the casket, his head bowed, lips moving in quiet conversation with the man who had been his friend and partner for over 40 years. Later, someone who overheard him would say he was thanking Hogan for every mile they'd traveled together, every laugh they'd shared, every risk they'd taken. When the service began, there was no podium, no formal procession. Instead, Vince McMahon stepped forward and spoke from the center of the room. His voice, usually so commanding, was lower than anyone had ever heard it. "We're here today," he said, "because this man changed all of our lives. He wasn't just a wrestler. He was the foundation we built on. Hulk Hogan didn't just fill arenas, he filled hearts. And today, we honor the man who made us all believe in the impossible." Ric Flair followed, and despite his reputation for flamboyance, his eyes were red and his voice cracked. "We fought in the ring," Flair said, "but outside of it, we were brothers. We didn't always agree. We didn't always get along. But we always knew that when the chips were down, we'd be there for each other." He was a giant in every way that matters. Flair's hand trembled as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small gold cross that Hogan had given him years earlier. Without a word, he placed it in the casket beside his friend. From the back of the room, the Undertaker emerged, towering in his all-black suit, eyes downcast. He stood for a long moment in silence before speaking. "Hulk Hogan was the first man to make The Undertaker feel like more than a gimmick," he said. "In 1991, when I took that title from him, he didn't have to make me look good. But he did. Because he believed in making the next guy, in passing the torch. And when you pass a torch like that, it burns forever." John Cena's tribute was quieter. He approached the casket, removed the armband from his wrist, the one he'd worn in nearly every match for 2 decades, and laid it gently across Hogan's folded hands. "I learned everything about being a champion from this man," Cena whispered. "Even when he wasn't on top, he carried himself like he was. And I'll carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life." Roman Reigns stood back for most of the service, letting the veteran speak, but when his turn came, the emotion in his voice was unmistakable. "When I was a kid, I thought Hulk Hogan was just a superhero on TV. But when I met him, I realized he was even bigger than that. He made people feel like they mattered. He made me feel like I mattered." He placed his WWE Universal Championship belt on a small table beside the casket. "This is here for today," he said, "because everything I've done in this business started with him." There were moments of levity too, stories that reminded everyone that Hogan wasn't just a wrestling god, but a man who loved to laugh. Shawn Michaels told of a time on tour in the 90s when Hogan had bet the entire locker room that he could eat 20 hot dogs in one sitting. "He did it," Michaels said, chuckling, and then went out that night and wrestled like nothing happened. The man was indestructible. The room laughed, and for a moment, the weight of grief lightened. After the speeches, the room fell into quiet again as friends and family approached the casket one by one. Some touched his hand. Others whispered their goodbyes. Jimmy Hart lingered the longest, his hand resting on the side of the casket as tears ran freely down his cheeks. "I'll see you down the road, baby," he said softly before stepping back. The service ended with a song, "Real American," played not as the blaring entrance theme it had been for decades, but in a stripped-down, acoustic arrangement performed by a friend of the family. The familiar lyrics, usually shouted in arenas, were now almost a lullaby. "I am a real American, fight for the rights of every man." By the final line, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. As pallbearers, including Flair, Cena, Undertaker, and Roman Reigns, carried the casket to a waiting hearse, the family stood on the steps of the mansion. Brooke Hogan, holding her brother Nick's hand, whispered something through tears. "The world shared you, Dad. But today, you're ours again." Outside the gates, a small group of fans who had gathered quietly began chanting, "Thank you, Hogan. Thank you, Hogan." The chant grew louder as the hearse pulled away, carrying the man who had been their childhood hero into the Florida sunlight one last time. Inside, the empty space where the casket had stood seemed impossibly large. Friends remained for hours afterward, swapping stories and holding on to each other. They knew the world would continue to celebrate Hulk Hogan, the larger-than-life icon. But in this room, among these people, it wasn't about Hulk Hogan. It was about Terry Bollea, the man who had given his life to a dream and, in doing so, had given so much of himself to everyone he met. And as the sun set over Clearwater Bay, its reflection turning the water gold, those who loved him most knew one thing with certainty: Hulk Hogan may have wrestled his last match, but the spirit of Hulkamania, the belief in strength, resilience, and the fight for what's right would live forever. 3 days after the private service in Clearwater, the world of professional wrestling shifted its gaze to the grandest stage WWE could offer for a farewell, the global memorial event. The choice was both symbolic and historic: Madison Square Garden, the very arena where Hulk Hogan had become a household name. From the moment the announcement went live, the event was sold out. Not a single ticket was made available for resale. Fans held onto them as if they were holding onto the last tangible piece of their hero. Outside the Garden, the streets of New York pulsed with color. Yellow and red shirts flooded the sidewalks, feather boas hung from the necks of lifelong fans, and replicas of Hogan's championship belts gleamed under the midday sun. The air was alive with nostalgia. Strangers who had never met before swapped stories of the first time they saw Hogan step into the ring. Some had driven hundreds of miles. Others had flown in from as far as Japan, Mexico, and the UK, each carrying the same reason in their hearts: to say goodbye together. Inside, the arena was transformed. The entrance ramp and stage were draped in Hogan's colors, with massive LED screens cycling through images from every stage of his career, from the young upstart body-slamming giants in the 80s to the defiant Hollywood Hogan of the NWO era, to the elder statesman of wrestling who would still rip his shirt and cup his ear to the crowd. In the center of the ring sat a single spotlight over a yellow mat emblazoned with the words Hulkamania Forever. The 10-bell salute began the moment the broadcast went live. The camera panned across a stage filled with WWE legends and current superstars, all standing shoulder to shoulder in silence. From The Undertaker and Ric Flair to Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, Bianca Belair, and Becky Lynch, generations of wrestling's finest stood united, heads bowed. The final bell echoed through the garden, and the crowd, without cue, began chanting in unison, "Thank you, Hogan." The sound was deafening, a living, breathing monument to the man's impact. Triple H stepped into the ring first, wearing a black suit with a small red and yellow ribbon pinned to his lapel. "This building was his kingdom," he began, his voice echoing softly. "Every great champion dreams of having that one match, that one night, that one moment that makes them immortal. Hulk Hogan had dozens. He didn't just headline WrestleMania, he created WrestleMania. He didn't just lead a company. He made wrestling mainstream. And tonight, we celebrate the man who gave us all something to believe in." Video packages rolled between speeches, each one a love letter to different eras of Hogan's career. The first focused on his rise in the 1980s, set to Survivor's Eye of the Tiger, showing his epic battles against Rowdy Roddy Piper, King Kong Bundy, and, of course, Andre the Giant. The second explored his WCW years, the formation of the NWO, and how Hogan managed to reinvent himself when the business began to change. The final package was perhaps the most poignant. It showed Hogan as the elder statesman of WWE, mentoring younger talent, making surprise appearances, and always reminding the crowd to say your prayers and eat your vitamins. When the lights came back up, John Cena was in the ring. The ovation lasted nearly a minute before he could speak. "I was just a kid watching from the front row when Hulk Hogan made me believe I could do anything," Cena said. "And years later, when I got to share a ring with him, I realized he wasn't playing a character, he was the real American hero. He fought for what was right, he fought for his friends, and he fought for his fans." Roman Reigns spoke next, this time shedding the tribal chief persona and addressing the audience as Joe Anoa'i. "Hulk Hogan was the first superstar my family ever pointed to and said, 'That's the bar.' And he never lowered it. He lifted all of us up to it." Roman's words resonated because they came without theatrics, just a man acknowledging another man's greatness. Then came the moment that would be replayed in tribute videos for years to come. Ric Flair, holding back tears, stepping between the ropes to share a story few had ever heard. "Back in '94, I was going through a rough patch. I was questioning whether I had anything left. And one night, Hogan came up to me in the locker room and said, 'Nate, if you're in that ring, there's still magic to be made.' That night, he pulled me aside after the match and said, 'I told you so.' That's who he was. He believed in everyone, even when they didn't believe in themselves." Flair then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the same cross he'd placed in Hogan's casket days earlier. He kissed it, looked to the sky, and said, "I'll ride with you forever, brother." The night wasn't just about speeches. WWE recreated some of Hogan's most iconic moments on the big screen, letting fans relive the electricity of WrestleMania 3, the chaos of the NWO takeover, and the roar of his surprise returns. Clips were met with cheers, tears, and even laughter. Like the time he accidentally called the Silverdome again during WrestleMania XXX, earning a playful ribbing from The Rock and Steve Austin. The Rock himself made a surprise appearance to close the night. The garden shook as he entered, not with his usual bravado, but with a solemn respect. "When I was a kid, I sat cross-legged in front of the TV watching Hulk Hogan," The Rock said. "Years later, I stood across the ring from him. And in both moments, I felt the same thing. Like I was in the presence of greatness." Hulk Hogan was more than a wrestler. He was a dreamer who dragged us all into his dream and made us feel like we could live there. The final tribute was unlike anything WWE had ever done. The lights dimmed and Hogan's theme song, Real American, began to play, not as the usual bombastic entrance music, but slowed down, stripped to a single guitar. As the melody filled the arena, the LED screens showed Hogan walking down countless aisles, ripping shirts, cupping ears, and smiling at fans. The last image was of him standing in the center of the ring, pointing to the camera, mouthing the words, "I love you, brother." When the song ended, the garden stayed dark for a long moment. Then, a single spotlight shone down on the yellow mat in the ring. The crowd stood, applauding. Not cheering, not chanting, but clapping in that slow, heartfelt way that says thank you without words. Outside of New York, the tributes continued. In Tokyo, NJPW held a ceremonial 10-bell salute before its main event. In Mexico City, CMLL wrestlers came to the ring wearing Hogan's colors. In small-town indie promotions across America, wrestlers dedicated matches in his name. Even high school gyms hosting local shows saw moments of silence for the man who had brought wrestling into their lives. For the fans, the morning was as much about celebrating as it was about grieving. In Clearwater, locals organized a Hulkamania beach walk, with hundreds of people walking the shoreline at sunset in his memory. In Los Angeles, a massive outdoor screen replayed his WrestleMania 3 match with Andre, drawing a crowd that chanted along with every brother he uttered. Online, fans from over 50 countries joined a live-streamed vigil, each sharing their own Hogan story. In the end, it became clear that Hulk Hogan's death had united the wrestling world in a way few moments ever could. Rivalries were set aside. Old grudges seemed petty. Legends who hadn't spoken in years found themselves reminiscing together. Because at his core, Hulk Hogan was the bridge between eras, the man who turned wrestling from a regional attraction into a global phenomenon. And though the man was gone, the movement he inspired, the cheers, the dreams, the belief in the comeback remained alive. In every ring, in every crowd, in every kid who cups his hand to his ear before pretending to deliver a leg drop, Hulkamania still runs wild. In the weeks following Hulk Hogan's passing, the wrestling world began to settle into the reality that an era had truly ended. The raw grief that had dominated locker rooms and arenas started to transform into something else, resolve. For WWE and its superstars, the conversation shifted from how do we mourn him to how do we make sure his legacy lives forever. At the WWE Performance Center in Orlando, where the next generation of talent trains, a brand new mural was commissioned. Stretching across the length of an entire wall, it depicted Hogan in 3 phases of his career: the young, fresh-faced hero slamming Andre the Giant, the rebellious Hollywood Hogan leading the NWO, and the elder statesman standing tall in his red and yellow gear. At the bottom, painted in bold letters, were his immortal words: train, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins. Triple H, speaking to recruits during a closed-door meeting, made it clear, every single one of you is here because men like Hulk Hogan made wrestling matter. He brought the world to our doorstep. If you want to honor him, carry yourself with the same passion he brought every night. The recruits listened in silence, some wiping away tears, others jotting down the quote as if it were scripture. On Raw and SmackDown, subtle tributes began to appear. Becky Lynch walked out in a yellow and red leather jacket. Cody Rhodes cut a promo on Legacy, pausing mid-sentence to throw in a "what ya gonna do, brother" to a roaring crowd. Seth Rollins, during a non-televised house show, hit a leg drop in the middle of a match, then pointed to the sky before covering his opponent. It wasn't played for laughs, it was an homage, and the audience knew it. Outside WWE, the ripple effect continued. AEW announced it would name its upcoming charity drive for children's hospitals the Hulk Hogan Power Slam Fund, acknowledging that Hogan's influence transcended company boundaries. In Japan, NJPW ran a feature in its official magazine chronicling Hogan's early tours there, with photos of him working alongside legends like Antonio Inoki. Mexican promotions aired highlight reels of Hogan's matches with commentary dubbing him El Inmortal. But perhaps the most powerful promise came from the fans themselves. In online forums, on podcasts, and at local meetups, people spoke about introducing Hulk Hogan to their children, not just as a wrestler, but as a figure who embodied the idea of never giving up. Parents showed their kids old WrestleMania matches, explaining why the crowd lost their minds when Hogan hulked up and shook off his opponent's blows. Others dug out VHS tapes and DVDs, telling the stories of where they were the first time they saw him. In Clearwater, the city council voted unanimously to rename a stretch of Gulf Boulevard near his home as Hulk Hogan Way. On the day the sign was unveiled, hundreds gathered, many wearing bandanas and feather boas, some holding up signs with the classic hand-to-ear pose. Brooke Hogan spoke briefly, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "My dad always said Clearwater was the place he felt most himself. Now, a part of him will always be here, watching over the people he loved." WWE announced that starting next year, the main event of WrestleMania would be preceded by a Hulk Hogan Legacy package, a short film celebrating the idea of the comeback of the underdog who refuses to quit. The company also revealed the creation of the Hogan Award, to be given annually to the superstar who best exemplifies resilience and fan connection both inside and outside the ring. Ric Flair, in an interview with ESPN, summed it up perfectly. "Hulk Hogan didn't just entertain us. He changed the business. We're all just trying to live up to the standard he set. And if we do, even just a little, then Hulkamania really will live forever." That sentiment found its way back to every corner of the wrestling world. In the UK, a grassroots fan event sprang up called Hogan Night, where people watched his matches on a giant outdoor screen, raising money for cancer research in his honor. In Canada, a local indie promotion ran a card entirely themed around his career, with every wrestler adopting a Hogan-inspired gimmick for one night. Even outside wrestling, the impact was felt. Sylvester Stallone announced he would produce a documentary chronicling his friendship with Hogan from their rocky 3 days to the very end. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson pledged to match all donations made to the Hulk Hogan Power Slam Fund for the next year. Celebrities who had never stepped into a ring shared stories of meeting him, stories of his generosity, his humor, his unwavering ability to make anyone feel like they mattered. And yet, for all the grand gestures, some of the most moving tributes remain the quietest. At the Performance Center, late at night when training had ended, a few recruits began a ritual. Before leaving, they would walk over to the Hogan mural, place a hand on it, and whisper, "Thanks, brother." No cameras, no audience, just young wrestlers acknowledging the man whose shadow they would wrestle under for the rest of their careers. In the end, the measure of Hulk Hogan's legacy wasn't just in the sold-out arenas, the merchandise, or the record-setting pay-per-view numbers. It was in the way people talked about him when the cameras weren't rolling, in the respect he commanded, the gratitude he inspired, and the belief he gave to millions that they, too, could rise after being knocked down. As WWE prepared to move forward without him, one thing was clear: Hogan's final gift to the wrestling world was not just the memories he left behind, but the challenge he set for everyone who came after him, to be larger than life in the ring, but even larger in heart outside of it. And so, somewhere between the roar of a crowd and the quiet of a late-night locker room, Hulkamania still runs wild, not just as a chant, not just as a catchphrase, but as a living, breathing reminder that heroes never truly leave. They live on in the people they inspire, in the stories told long after the final bell, and in the belief that the fight is never over as long as you have the will to keep going. Under the Florida sun, the wrestling world found itself in a strange, delicate balance. Caught between deep mourning and a renewed celebration of everything Hulk Hogan had stood for. His passing had left a hole that could never truly be filled, but his influence had seeped into every corner of the industry, becoming part of its very DNA. For weeks, tributes continued to ripple outward, moving further and further from the arenas he once ruled to reach places he might never have imagined his impact would be felt. In the small towns of America, independent wrestling promotions were running Hogan Night events, with young performers donning red and yellow gear, tearing their shirts in homage before matches. In one tiny gymnasium in Ohio, a crowd of just over 100 erupted into chants of Hogan. Hogan, as a rookie wrestler, no older than 20, hit the ropes, cupped his hand to his ear, and grinned with a charisma that felt, for a moment, like the immortal one himself had returned. Later, the young wrestler would say in a post-match interview, "I never met Hulk Hogan. But my dad told me stories about him every night before bed when I was a kid. And I feel like I knew him." This was the truth of Hogan's legacy. He wasn't just a star in the present tense. He was a torch that kept lighting new flames long after his own had dimmed. The WWE offices knew this, and so did the fans. That's why the plans for the Hulk Hogan Legacy Award quickly took on a larger scope than anyone anticipated. What was supposed to be a simple annual honor for a single superstar was expanded into a week-long celebration each year, featuring charity events, meet and greets, youth mentorship programs, and a dedicated WWE Network special that would premiere every summer in Hogan's honor. Triple H, in a closed meeting with executives, explained it plainly: Hogan was more than a wrestler. He was a connection between us and the fans, between one generation and the next. We're not just going to remember him, we're going to keep him alive in everything we do. And they meant it. Plans were set in motion to immortalize Hogan in ways that stretched far beyond WWE's immediate universe. An interactive exhibit was approved for the WWE Hall of Fame in Orlando, designed so fans could step into a simulated entrance, complete with the roar of the crowd, the pyrotechnics, and the sound of real American blasting from the speakers. Visitors could even rip a Velcro shirt as a camera recorded them hulking up to share online. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was an invitation for new fans to step into Hogan's world. The outpouring from fellow legends didn't slow down either. Bret the Hitman Hart, who had shared both rivalry and respect with Hogan, broke his usual stoic demeanor during a Canadian sports broadcast. "I'll say it now because I didn't say it enough when he was alive: Hulk Hogan changed wrestling forever. And whether you liked him or not, you couldn't deny the electricity when he walked into a room. That's something you can't teach." In Japan, Antonio Inoki's family sent a letter to Hogan's estate, recalling the early matches the two had shared. It spoke of mutual respect, of bridging East and West, of the way Hogan carried himself not as a foreign invader, but as a willing student of the craft. "In the ring, he was a mountain," the letter read. "Outside the ring, he was a river flowing with warmth and generosity." But perhaps the most touching tributes came not from wrestling insiders, but from the fans who had grown up with him. In Los Angeles, a father and son were interviewed outside a wrestling-themed bar that had hosted a Hogan tribute night. The father wore a faded Hulkamania shirt that looked as though it had survived decades of washing, while the boy wore a brand-new replica. "I was the kid on the couch in '87 watching him slam Andre," the father said, pride in his voice. "Now he's the kid watching Hogan highlights with me. 2 generations. Same hero." The boy smiled shyly, gripping the championship belt strapped around his waist. "When I grow up, I want to be strong like Hulk Hogan," he said. Those connections, the ones that stretched across time, were where Hogan's true immortality lived. It wasn't just that people remembered him, it was that they shared him. In every retelling, in every replayed match, in every impersonated promo shouted in a living room, Hogan was still working the crowd, still rallying the people, still turning doubt into belief. At WrestleMania, that truth hit its most emotional note yet. In the middle of the show, after a particularly hard-fought match between two current top stars, the lights dimmed. On the big screen, an image of Hogan appeared, shirt torn, muscles flexed, sweat glistening under the arena lights. The crowd erupted before they even realized what was happening. Then, Hogan's voice filled the stadium, pulled from an old interview. To all my little Hulkamaniacs, train, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins. I'll always be with you, brother. When the lights came back, the entire stadium was glowing yellow and red. Tens of thousands of fans stood, chanting, clapping, some openly crying. Even the performers in the ring, still catching their breath, stood silently in respect. The camera cut to the commentary desk, where Corey Graves struggled to speak without his voice breaking. Hulk Hogan isn't just part of wrestling history, he is wrestling history, he said, each word deliberate. From that night forward, WWE quietly began ending every major pay-per-view with a subtle tribute, a single shot of an empty ring, one spotlight in the center, and Hogan's voice faintly in the background. What you gonna do, brother? No explanation. No graphics. Just a quiet reminder of the man who had been the heartbeat of the industry. But Hogan's influence wasn't confined to scripted moments. Behind the scenes, his legacy was shaping the way the business thought about its future. The emphasis on fan connection, on making every child in the front row feel like the most important person in the arena, became a renewed priority. WWE's outreach programs expanded, taking superstars into schools, hospitals, and community centers with a focus on inspiring confidence and resilience. Many cited Hogan as the reason they signed up for the extra work. It's what he would have done, Bianca Belair said during one visit to a children's hospital, handing out headbands and t-shirts. He made people believe in themselves. That's the real legacy. The next Survivor Series was unofficially dubbed Hogan's Night. The event opened with a massive tag team match featuring 4 generations of wrestlers, from veterans like Randy Orton to rookies just months into their main roster runs. The match was staged in a way that allowed every competitor to hit a Hogan-inspired move at some point, whether it was the big boot, the leg drop, or the dramatic hulking up sequence. By the time the final bell rang, the audience was on its feet, chanting Hogan's name once more. In the weeks after, WWE's merchandise store reported record sales for Hogan memorabilia. Not just classic shirts and replica belts, but new items designed to blend modern fashion with the vintage flair of Hulkamania. The company pledged a portion of all proceeds to children's health charities, further cementing Hogan's role as a symbol of giving back. The ripple effect reached far beyond wrestling. Sports commentators on ESPN and Fox Sports referenced Hogan's famous catchphrases when describing comebacks in basketball or football. An NFL player entered a playoff game to Real American, ripping his jersey open to reveal a Hogan shirt underneath. A UFC fighter, after a victory, dropped to one knee and pointed skyward, mouthing the word brother before exiting the octagon. Even in music, Hogan's influence found a stage. At a major rock festival, a band paused their set to play a snippet of Real American, with the crowd chanting along. For Hulk, the lead singer said simply, holding up a bandana to a sea of cheering fans. And still, for all the grand tributes and high-profile moments, the truest reflection of his impact remained in the quiet, personal gestures. A fan leaving a single yellow rose on the steps of a local arena. A child wearing a homemade Hulkamania cape to school for Superhero Day. A wrestling coach in a small-town gym telling his students, when the odds are against you, remember Hogan. He never stayed down. Months after his passing, it became clear that Hogan's death had sparked something rare, a unity in wrestling that transcended promotions, eras, and egos. Rivalries, both scripted and real, softened. Collaborations across companies, once unthinkable, began to happen in Hogan's name. If nothing else, the man had proven that even in an industry built on competition, there was room for shared respect. At the first annual Hulk Hogan Legacy Award ceremony, the honor went to John Cena. Standing at the podium in front of a crowd that included WWE stars, AEW talent, and JPW representatives, and a mix of celebrities and athletes, Cena spoke from the heart. "We can all debate the greatest wrestler of all time," he said. "But the greatest connection? The greatest bridge between us and the fans? That was Hulk Hogan. And if we keep building those bridges, if we keep making people believe, then Hulkamania really will live forever. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 3 minutes. And as the camera panned the crowd, catching tears in the eyes of men and women who had spent their lives in the business, it was obvious that Cena's words weren't just a tribute, they were a promise. Because Hulk Hogan had given wrestling more than moments, more than records, more than memories. He had given it a blueprint for how to inspire, how to connect, and how to become larger than life without ever forgetting the people who made it possible. And so, in arenas big and small, from Madison Square Garden to the tiniest high school gym, the legacy continued. Not as a shadow, but as a light, guiding the next generation to step through the ropes with their heads high, their hearts open, and the belief that anything is possible if you just say your prayers, eat your vitamins, and believe in yourself, brother. In the final years of his life, far from the roar of the arenas and the blinding pyrotechnics, Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, spent much of his time in reflection. Clearwater had become his sanctuary, a place where the salt air and steady rhythm of the Gulf Tide gave him something the wrestling business never could: stillness. Yet, even in those quiet days, wrestling never truly left him. He would often wake early, long before the Florida sun crested the horizon, and sit in his kitchen with a mug of coffee, scrolling through old matches on a tablet. Sometimes it was his bout with Andre at WrestleMania 3, which he'd seen 1,000 times, but still watched with the wide-eyed excitement of a young man. Other times, it was grainy footage from the early 80s, when he was still carving out his place in the WWF. Watching those matches, he would shake his head and chuckle at the audacity of his younger self, the showboating, the exaggerated flexes, the way he could make a crowd erupt with a single point of the finger. Friends who visited him in those years say Hogan spoke more often as Terry than as the Immortal. He still enjoyed slipping into the persona, still dropped the occasional "whatcha gonna do, brother?" for a laugh, but the man behind the character was softer now. He talked about his children with pride, his grandkids with a warmth that made his eyes shine. He spoke about the mistakes he'd made, the grudges he'd let linger too long, and the friendships he wished he'd mended sooner. One of those friends was Macho Man Randy Savage's brother, Lanny Poffo. The two would meet for lunch once a month at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. According to Poffo, Hogan had a habit of bringing scrap paper and jotting down notes during their conversations, ideas for charity events, names of wrestlers he wanted to reach out to, and even personal letters he planned to send. It was like he was still booking matches, Poffo once said. Only now, the matches were about making peace. In those final years, Hogan also opened his doors to young wrestlers who sought his guidance. They came from WWE, AEW, Japan, Mexico, some already rising stars, others barely past their first year in the ring. Hogan would invite them into his living room, where championship belts and photos with legends lined the walls. Over glasses of iced tea, he'd talk about the art of storytelling in wrestling, the importance of pacing a match, and the need to make every person in the crowd feel like the main event was for them. "You can have all the moves in the world," he told one young performer, "but if the fans don't care about you, you're just another body in the ring. Make them care. That's the magic." It was during these sessions that Hogan revealed some of his own vulnerabilities. He spoke openly about the toll wrestling had taken on his body, the surgeries, the chronic pain, the way certain mornings felt like climbing into the ring just to get out of bed. But he never complained. Instead, he'd laugh about the absurdity of it. "I used to jump off the top rope like I was 20, he said once, shaking his head. "Now I celebrate if I get off the couch without pulling something." Still, his physical challenges never dulled his presence. Even in his late 60s, he carried himself with that unmistakable Hogan swagger, greeting strangers in the street with a handshake that felt like it could still crush bones. In Clearwater, he wasn't just a celebrity, he was a neighbor. He'd wave to kids riding bikes, pose for photos at the grocery store, and show up unannounced at charity car washes, rolling up his sleeves and laughing with volunteers. Privately, however, Hogan was aware of the ticking clock. Close friends say he spoke more frequently about legacy, what he'd leave behind, not just in wrestling, but in the lives of the people he'd touched. In one conversation with Jimmy Hart, Hogan reportedly said, "I've had the main events, the titles, the fame. But when I go, I don't want them to just remember the wrestler. I want them to remember the guy who took the time to say hello." In the months before his passing, Hogan began working on what he called his farewell project. It was part memoir, part love letter to the business. In it, he wanted to tell stories that had never made it to the documentaries or interviews, the backstage laughs, the pranks, the moments of doubt, and the people who'd pulled him through. One chapter, according to a close confidant, was entirely devoted to Andre the Giant. Hogan had told the story